I guess I should introduce you to the audience. Welcome online and welcome everybody here. We just wanted to, again, for the recording, we wanted to introduce Swami Medhanandaji from the Hollywood Center of Vedanta Society, Southern California. A Swami from all over the world and of some renown and fame. So we thank you for coming, and we'll let you tell it maybe about yourself too.
Oh, we did that yesterday.
We did that. This is a new group. This is all new.
That's okay. Just a month.
I'll have to go back to recordings too.
I'm a monk who writes some books. Okay.
Good books.
Because we got a lot to discuss today. It'll be good evening, everyone. I should start. Let's start with the mantra. We can do this formally. Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarva dharma swarupine avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. Om vasam sijinani yatha vihaya navani grihnati naroparani tatha sharirani vihaya jinan anyani sanyati navani devi. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2. Just as a person at the end of a long day casts off his worn out clothes and puts on a new set of clothes, just so the embodied soul casts off one physical body at the end of a life and takes on a new body. Om peace, peace, peace. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. We had a lovely hike this morning. I always love coming to Vegas. Of course, for you guys and everything else, but also for the nice hikes. Those are great perks for Red Rock and Mount Charleston. It's great. So today we went to Mount Charleston. It's really fun. And we've got another hike tomorrow, if any of you are interested. I think we leave here at 8 a.m. I have to confirm that, though. So please come. Come on. Okay, so the talk today will be based on my latest book. This is my fourth book, little guy. The reason being that the publisher, Cambridge University Press, they give me a strict word limit, exactly 30,000 words, not one word over. And it's called Karma and Rebirth in Hinduism. And the assignment was to write an introductory overview on this topic, okay, while at the same time being argumentative. So they encouraged me to take a stand. And so I'll explain what my overarching argument is in the book. And at the same time, to be not just introductory, but the book should be of use to scholars and students as well. And so I have to give a kind of state-of-the-art of academic scholarship on some of the main issues and debates concerning karma and rebirth in Hinduism. So it's a tall task, but I had a lot of fun writing it, and I learned a lot as well. Overall, I'm quite happy with the product. Unfortunately, the production quality could be better, in my opinion. They could have published it as a smaller book in a larger font to make it a little bit more readable, but that wasn't in my hands, unfortunately. It's part of a book series, and so they just follow the template for all the books in the series. The series is called Cambridge Elements in Global Philosophy of Religion. It's one book in that series. So my hands are tied in that regard, but I hope you like the content at least. And so what I'll be talking about today is some of the main points that I discuss in this book. Okay, if you're interested, there are, I guess, 2 copies left because most of them were sold yesterday and signed. We have a couple copies, and then if you would like a copy and we don't have one for you, let Jeff know and we'll figure it out. And I brought some. I brought some. Oh, there you go. If you brought something, yeah, it was good to see you guys. Yeah. There you go. You guys are smart. You guys are smart. Okay, so first of all, you might wonder about target audience, right? Anytime somebody writes a book, you wonder who's it for. And one thing that is nice about this book is that I try to appeal to a broad audience. Okay, so number one, it should appeal to scholars and students because it is an academic overview of these topics. And I really go into a lot of the nuances of these doctrines that I think a lot of us don't even think about. Even if we are inclined to accept the doctrines, we often don't think about the nuances and subtleties of these doctrines. And so I'll be giving a sense of some of those nuances today. Okay, that's number one. Number two, but the book is also for skeptics of these doctrines, people who are profoundly skeptical of or critical of these doctrines and think they're bogus, silly, unfounded, implausible, whatever. And that's the main argument that this book makes, is that when we weigh and consider the arguments both for these doctrines, karma and rebirth, and the arguments against karma and rebirth, what we find is a kind of asymmetry. And it turns out, I argue, that it's reasonable to accept these doctrines. Okay, and then it's up to the skeptic to try to disprove the arguments that I'm presenting here. And you should all think for yourselves about it. Chapters 3 and 4 of the book look at arguments in support of karma and rebirth, that's chapter 3, and then arguments against karma and rebirth, that's chapter 4. And in chapter 4, I also look at how defenders of these doctrines will respond to those main objections. And so it's what's called dialectic, a kind of back and forth, argumentative back and forth between defenders of rebirth and critics of rebirth. Okay, and then I let you guys decide for yourselves. So that's a second core audience that I hope this book appeals to, skeptics about rebirth and karma. The third audience or group of people that this book should appeal to are people who are already inclined to accept these doctrines, or people who wholeheartedly embrace these doctrines. I've believed in these doctrines for 50 years now, so that's great too. But will the book be preaching to the choir for that group? No, I don't think so. When you read the book, I think that a lot of people who already believe in these doctrines will say, yeah, a lot of this makes sense, but they're also going to learn a lot of new stuff. It'll raise questions in their minds that they may either have never thought about, or maybe there are questions that they've thought about, but they don't exactly know how to answer the questions. And the way I see it, for people who already are inclined to accept these doctrines, this book will help you in the spiritual practice of faith-seeking understanding. You already have faith in these doctrines, but this book, I hope, will help you as spiritual aspirants, actually, to deepen your understanding of what these doctrines are, and even more importantly, you'll be able to appreciate better how you can incorporate these doctrines into your day-to-day life as spiritual aspects. It's practical value, okay? Because I think these doctrines, one of the things that's so amazing about these doctrines is that they're so practical, even though they might seem theoretical. They are theoretical, but they're profoundly practical at the same time. So how do these doctrines help us in our day-to-day life? If we believe in karma and if we believe in rebirth, how does that help us as spiritual aspects? So I want to tackle that at the end of today's talk as well. Okay, so first of all, as I promised, one of the main things that I do, especially in chapter 2 of this book, is I delve into some of the nuances of these doctrines of karma and rebirth, okay, which I think a lot of people haven't thought about deeply enough. And I look at both classical Hindu texts and figures. By classical, I mean the older texts, okay? And I also look at some of the modern Hindu figures. What do I mean by modern? Some of the Hindu thinkers and philosophers and saints who wrote and spoke and taught in the context of British colonial India. For instance, Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, Paramahamsa Yogananda. Jeff, by the way, I should thank him. And I did thank him in the acknowledgements. He's there. Because nice. He's such an expert in Paramahamsa Yogananda that I asked for quotations about karma and rebirth from the SRF standpoint. And he kindly obliged, and I incorporated some of them in my book. So grateful to him. I would have incorporated more, and I had more, and then I had to cut them because they were so strict about this 30,000. It was like 100 words over, like, no. So, sorry, Yogananda, but I tried to remove a couple things. But anyway, I still have it there. I mentioned Prabhupada from ISKCON, and a number, Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta Maharaj. So it tries to be broad-based. Notice the title is not Karma and Rebirth in the Ramakrishna tradition. It's Karma and Rebirth in Hinduism, which means it's my duty as a scholar and as the author to go for coverage and to discuss different Hindu traditions and not just focus on my own, just because it happens to be mine, right? So you'll recognize that, I hope, that broadness in my approach. Now, in chapter 2, I'm just going to give you a taste of some of the main questions that about these doctrines of karma and rebirth that I try to answer. Okay, so the first one. Okay, the doctrine of karma is actually, in its fundamentals, very simple. It holds that we reap what we sow. It's a standard metaphor. Most of us understand what that means. But then I want to raise an interesting question, which I bet we haven't thought about deeply enough. Okay, fine. So karma means that I reap what I sow. How exactly do we reap what we sow? How? What's the mechanism by which the doctrine of karma makes us reap what we sow? Okay, that sounds kind of abstract, but now let me put some flesh on that to make it clear what I mean. It seems to me that if you look at the Hindu literature on karma and rebirth, what you find are two very different but complementary explanations of how we reap what we sow. Okay, one I would call a metaphysical explanation, and the second I would call a psychological explanation. And you'll find Hindu texts going either emphasizing one or the other. Actually, usually they tend to emphasize the first kind, the metaphysical explanation. What do I mean by that? Here's the general picture. I do a good action that generates a metaphysical category called punya, which means merit, karmic merit. It's not like a physical substance like a book or a table, but it's a thing. It's a metaphysical something. Karmic merit. What happens as a result of that merit? Either later in this life or in a future life, that merit leads to favorable and positive circumstances and life experiences. Okay? And exactly the opposite holds too. This is all part of the metaphysical explanation. I do something bad. Bad from a moral standpoint. Something selfish, something hurtful to another person, for instance. What happens as a result? That generates the metaphysical quantum of papa. It's the opposite of punya. And so instead of merit, that action generates demerit. Okay? That karmic demerit leads to negative or unfavorable circumstances later in this life or in a future life. Okay? So that's why karma and rebirth go hand in hand in Hinduism. You can't have one without the other. Okay? Because the fruits of our karmas, our actions, may not fructify in this life. They may only fructify in a later life. That's why we need to posit multiple lifetimes. Okay, so that's the metaphysical explanation. I bet if I were to ask you guys, how do we reap what we sow before you heard this, you'd probably give an answer along those lines. Many of you have probably heard of that metaphysical account of how we reap what we sow. But there's also, you'll find in some of the main texts, like Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, for instance, and in the teachings of Swami Vivekananda, in his book Raja Yoga, for instance, you'll find a very different explanation of how we reap what we sow. And it's what I would call a psychological explanation. Okay, what does that look like? Well, I perform an action, whether good or bad. That action produces samskaras. Samskara means latent mental impression. Okay? Every action we engage in, physical actions, verbal actions, and even mental actions, thoughts are mental actions, leave behind traces in the unconscious. Those are called samskaras, latent mental impressions. What happens as a result? Those samskaras make it more likely, make us more prone to engaging in the same kind of behavior in the future. Okay? Until that action, whatever that action is, whether good or bad, becomes a habit. It's because of samskaras that we form habits. The more we do something, the more samskaras we have, and the more automatically and naturally and spontaneously we feel compelled to do the same thing again. That's the whole nature of addiction, actually. Good addictions and bad addictions, right? And there's a lot of literature now on the power of habit, right? In the self-help literature. We can undo bad habits with good habits, right? With counter habits. And what is character? Swami Vivekananda asks, what is character? Each one of us has a character, a moral character. It's nothing but a bundle of habits. Okay, so those acts create samskaras in the mind. Those samskaras create habits. Those habits form our characters. And our actions flow automatically from our character. And so it's this kind of cycle. Okay, if I had a PowerPoint, I'd show you. But it's action leading to samskara, leading to habit, leading to character, leading to actions. Okay? And so you can reform your character by changing your actions and changing your habits. If you have a bad habit, counter that bad habit with a good habit. And then your character is going to be transformed as well. This is a completely different explanation for how we reap what we sow, do you see? From the metaphysical explanation. And you'll find both kinds of accounts, the metaphysical and the psychological, in the main Hindu text. Although I think that predominantly you'll find more of the metaphysical account. But they're both true, and they're complementary. They're not mutually exclusive. So if you accept one, you don't have to reject the other. You can accept both. And they kind of mutually illuminate each other. So there are two different ways in which we reap what we sow, according to the law of karma. Okay? Okay, so that's the first thing. I hope that's already, you've learned something potentially new or clarifying. But there's a lot more. And obviously this is not going to be comprehensive. There's a lot in the book that I won't be able to cover today. But I just want to give you a glimpse of some of the things you can expect in the book. Another one. Now you might be a little puzzled already, especially based on the metaphysical account of karma. Okay? Because remember, I engage in good behavior. What happens? I generate, that creates merit, karmic merit. Punya. And that leads to positive circumstances in the future birth. And then the opposite is also true. And then you might ask, well, then how the heck do we escape from this cycle of liberation? Is it just, I do something good and I have to come back, I do something bad, I have to come back? Where's the escape? Isn't the goal of Hinduism liberation and all the enlightenment traditions in Hinduism? The answer is yes. But how do we achieve liberation? How do we escape this karmic cycle? It all depends on our motivation, our inner attitude when we engage in actions. Okay, and there are two fundamentally different ways of engaging in actions. One is, in Sanskrit, it's called sakama. The other is nishkama. Sakama means I engage in actions with selfish motivations. I'm doing something for the purpose of self-aggrandizement, for getting some benefit to myself as a result, and so on. If you do the same action, but in a nishkama spirit, which means selflessly, unselfishly, you don't generate any additional karma that will bind you to this world. You might still enjoy favorable circumstances in the future, but that's a side effect. That's not the main result. The main result is you purify your mind and make spiritual progress toward the ultimate goal of liberation. So you're following? So when we engage in, even when it's a good action, there are two fundamentally different ways we can engage in a good action. Just take a simple example of working in a soup kitchen, going there and serving the poor. I can go there with the selfish motive of adding a line to my CV so I can get into the dream college of my choice. I can go there as a publicity stunt if I'm like a celebrity or something, so that my name is on the newspaper. Look, so and so famous person goes every weekend to the soup kitchen to help the poor. Isn't he such a great person? Blah blah blah. Right? There's so many. Or I can do it for recognition and blah blah blah. Okay, all selfish motives. What happens as a result? I get the good karmic results of that good action, right? And I might go to some temporary heaven for some time, enjoy life up there for some time, but then I have to come back. Those are temporary heavens. They're not eternal heavens. Okay. If I do the same good action, working in the soup kitchen, serving the poor, but unselfishly, without any selfish motives, what happens? I purify my mind and take a few steps toward the ultimate goal of liberation. And as a nice side effect, actually depends on, there are different Hindu traditions have different takes on this, but the Vedantic view seems to be that even though I have no selfish motives, I still get good karmic results as a result of the good actions. But the main result is purification of mind and making spiritual progress. Okay? So that's another key question that I hope I've cleared up a little bit. For details, please read chapter 2 of the book. Another question, very fundamental question, which I've been asking this question for years. Even when I started thinking about karma and rebirth, I was like, yeah, they make sense. But here's the question: who or what exactly reincarnates? Seems like such a fundamental question, and you might think easy. Well, let me ask you guys right now: who do you think, who or what reincarnates? What is the reincarnating entity? Okay, that's one answer. The Atman. So that's the conscious soul. Anyone else? Huh?
Conscious soul. Yeah,
the conscious soul.
Yeah.
So that's the same thing as the Atman. Anyone else want to throw out any answers? Okay, that's a pretty good answer. Well, let me share with you. You're not wrong, actually. But at the same time, one of the things I'm doing in this book is pointing out that we have to be very, very careful when we make generalizations about the Hindu doctrine of karma and rebirth, the Hindu view on the reincarnating entity. Okay, we need to avoid that. If we're subtle and if we're serious and careful and rigorous, we're going to find that there isn't just one Hindu answer to the question of who or what reincarnates. Okay, in fact, as far as I could tell, based on my research, there are at least 3 different answers to this question within Hinduism. One of the answers is the one that you gave and that you gave. It's the Atman. Nyaya, interesting. The school of Nyaya holds this view. Okay, Nyaya is considered to be the school of logic, so it's like a lot of hair-splitting logical discussions and stuff like that. And they say that's a conscious soul that reincarnates. Okay, but there's another view which is almost at the opposite extreme, and it's held by Sankhya, which is one of the oldest schools of Indian philosophy. Sankhya. And yoga, some of you are familiar with the yoga philosophy of Patanjali, that's based on Sankhya philosophy. Okay. So what does Sankhya say? It says the reincarnating entity is the subtle body. The soul doesn't reincarnate. The soul is eternally liberated. So that's not a candidate for reincarnation, right? It's like the witness, the eternal witness to what's happening at the realm of it. So it has to be something on the side of nature that reincarnates. So what did they pick? The subtle body. What is a subtle body? It's a subtle form of matter, and it's the mind. The mind itself is a subtle form of matter. This gets weird. I mean, you might think, because from a Western standpoint, that sounds weird. But the mind in Indian traditions is actually a subtle form of matter. Okay, so it's just the mind, and they say it's the mind that reincarnates. The mind leaves the physical body at the time of death, and then the mind takes up another body. But the mind is strictly speaking insentient. It falls on the side of insentient nature. So that's a Sankhyan answer. And it denies, it says the conscious soul is just the eternal witness. That doesn't reincarnate. Okay. Now, I haven't talked about the tradition that's probably closest to our hearts, which is Vedanta. These are called Vedanta societies for a reason. What's the Vedantic answer? It's interesting that none of you gave the full Vedantic answer. Now, can you guess what the full Vedantic answer is?
The soul and the subtle body reincarnate.
The
soul,
combination of the two.
You got a smart guy here. Yeah. Exactly. The Vedantic answer combines these two and says it's the conscious soul in association with the subtle body that reincarnates from birth to birth.
Does that include the prarabdha karma?
So the karma is contained in the subtle body in the form of samskaras. And the conscious soul carries those samskaras in the subtle body with it. So in the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 15, there's a beautiful verse using a really nice evocative kind of metaphor to explain this, which says, at the time of physical death, the conscious soul takes along with it, departs the physical body and takes along with it the subtle body, just as the wind steals the perfume or fragrance from a vase full of flowers. It's clearly is stemming from, I mean, it's explaining this metaphor from a spiritual experience, some kind of near-death experience or something, some kind of saint experiencing an outer-body experience. So that's the idea. It's the Jivatma in association with the subtle body. Okay, and you might ask, well, why is that a better or more plausible answer than just the conscious soul? Well, on the one hand, so Nyaya says just the conscious soul. One problem is, well, how can the conscious soul carry memories and samskaras and those kinds of things? The Nyaya philosophy says that the Atman can do that. But in Vedanta, it doesn't. You need the subtle body to be a repository of those samskaras and the memories and all those things. Okay. On the other hand, Sankhya runs into, I think, some pretty serious problems, and I talk about those problems in chapter 2 of the book. Why can't the subtle body by itself be the reincarnating entity? This is a very interesting question. Well, remember, according to Sankhya, the subtle body falls on the side of insentient nature. So it makes as much sense to say that this chair reincarnates as it does to say that an insentient subtle body reincarnates, right? The reincarnating entity needs to feel suffering. It needs to feel, whoa, this life sucks. Let me get out of it. I want liberation. Who says that? No AI robot, no matter how sophisticated, it can say it, but it won't feel it because it lacks first-person experience.
His
So-
book even gets into
I get it.
One of them says a plant does it, right?
Yeah.
I read that.
Yeah,
All-
good. That's in
even
this
all
book.
these
Yeah,
except for the plant. The
right,
plant
exactly.
doesn't
Yeah, no, so even
It's
souls,
all over the place.
souls also inhabit plants. Yeah. So yeah, so what's missing from the Sankhyan response, which is just the subtle body, the subtle body has no consciousness. It has no first-person experience. But it makes no sense to talk about an entity that is striving for liberation, that feels bound, that feels suffering, unless there's consciousness associated with it. So you need both. You need the conscious soul. So that's why Vedanta says conscious soul gives us first-person experience, consciousness. The subtle body is the repository of samskaras, memories, and so on and so forth. So you need both. Okay? So I hope that's interesting too. Another one, which is really, really important. What is the overarching purpose of the law of karma? Okay? What is the overarching purpose? There is a mainstream understanding of the law of karma, which says the overarching purpose is reward and punishment. Simple. I do something good. God who is the karma paladata, which means he gives us our karmic fruits. I do something good. God rewards me with a lollipop. Good for you. Like a good kindergarten teacher. And then I do something bad. God gives me a slap on the wrist or something worse. I have to suffer for it. Bad boy. And I get punished. Reward, punishment. Reward, punishment. This is a very common understanding of the purpose of karma. So common that you'll find it in pop culture. There's a show called The Big Bang Theory. Some of you have probably seen it. There's an Indian character, Rajesh Kuttapalli. He used to come to the Hollywood Society. He attends some of my classes and talks. He's a nice guy. Put on the hair. He would come with his wife. And there's a scene where Leonard feels guilty about sabotaging Penny's date with somebody because he has a crush on Penny, but he's too much of a coward to tell her. And so instead, he's passive aggressively trying to sabotage her date with someone else. And he feels bad. And then Rajesh says, you should feel bad because you've created a lot of bad karma. And you do something bad, ultimately you'll be reborn as a banana slug. Okay, this is very common. And it's kind of terrifying to people. If I do something, if I'm really bad in this life, will I be reborn as a banana slug, as a bacterium, as a plant? And we'll talk about that too. We'll get to it in a second, actually. That's a separate question. Okay, so that's a common understanding, and it's not wrong. Actually, you'll find classical Hindu texts teaching what's called a retributive conception of karma. Retribution. Karma is retribution, either good or bad. I do something good, I'm rewarded. I do something bad, I'm punished. Okay? Like God becomes a kind of like dispenser of justice kind of a thing. And he uses the law of karma to dispense his justice. But there's a totally different way of thinking about the overarching purpose of karma, which it still accepts that we reap what we sow. So the way that Sri Ramakrishna would put it is, if you eat a chili, won't your tongue burn? That is indisputable. Okay, that's true. If I do something stupid, I'll pay for it. But what's the overarching purpose? There's a totally different theory called the evolutionary understanding of karma. Evolutionary karma. So just try to remember these terms because they come in very handy. Retributive karma versus evolutionary karma. So I've explained retributive karma as reward and punishment. Evolutionary karma is the overarching purpose of karma is to foster our moral and spiritual evolution, our moral and spiritual growth. We learn through both good and bad experiences, the good, the bad, the ugly, the stupid, the wonderful. We learn through all our experiences, especially the ones that we regret later. We learn from our mistakes. We learn from other people's mistakes, right? It's through our encounter with both good and bad and engaging in both good and bad behavior that we grow. So the overarching purpose of the law of karma is much more positive. It's not about being rewarded or punished, which sounds kind of narrow and not very inspiring from a spiritual standpoint. But it's our moral and spiritual growth. That's the overarching purpose of this. And it's a spiritual journey of many, many lifetimes. We'll make a certain amount of progress in this life. We'll start where we left off in our next life. So it's like if you think about it in terms of a bank account. Let's say that in this life I make $2,000. In my next life I start with a $2,000 balance. I don't start from zero, right? And then I make a few more $1,000, garment bucks or whatever, and I keep going. And the beauty of it is, if you believe that there is karma, and you believe especially in an evolutionary doctrine of karma, and in rebirth, which means we get as many lifetimes as it takes to get things right. One arguably logical consequence is that every single one of us will eventually attain the highest goal of liberation. Nobody will be left out. Why? You might think, what about Hitler? What about these terrible people? Yeah, the Jeffrey Epstein, this and that. Yeah, they're bad in this life. But their soul is going to be, first of all, they're going to suffer in some temporary lokas. They're called lokas, realms. Okay. They're temporary. They're not eternal. We don't believe in an eternal hell, in our tradition at least. But they're going to have to come back and continue to work out the karma. And they might have to be reborn as the Lord knows what for a few lifetimes. But eventually, the soul of Hitler will no longer be a bad soul. It'll become a perfected soul. It's an amazing thing. Nobody will be left out. That gives all of us hope and consolation. Just think about it. Right? It's not Hitler that's getting liberation. The soul is no longer Hitler. It gets purified after many, 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 many lifetimes. That's the idea. Okay. Okay. So keep that in mind. And you might ask, well, who are some of these Hindu figures that accept the evolutionary doctrine of karma? Sri Ramakrishna. You know, there's one place in the gospel, if you've read the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, there's a place where somebody asks, why is it that God, if God is perfectly loving, he loves us, why has he given us so many selfish qualities that make our lives hell and make other people's lives hell and make one human being inflict suffering on another person? What are some examples of selfish qualities? Lust, anger, greed. Just open a newspaper and you'll see every day the results of lust, anger, and greed. Right? These things, delusion. Sri Ramakrishna's answer, very succinct and very powerful. In order to create saints. Isn't that interesting? In order to create saints. That's his literal answer. Mohat lok toir kormebod in Bengal. He says, yes, it's true that these are selfish qualities. These take us further away from God. But then he says, one becomes a saint by conquering the senses and conquering these selfish qualities, by overcoming them. How do you overcome something without knowing intimately what it is and its effect on your life? Right? So that's the idea. God has given us these selfish qualities in order to overcome them. So spiritual life becomes this journey of becoming saints. Every single one of us will end up a saint. Not necessarily in this lifetime, but eventually. So that's called universal liberation. Okay, so an evolutionary approach to karma goes hand in hand with the doctrine of universal liberation. It's a very liberal and I think a very spiritually positive and appealing doctrine. Right? Nobody will be left out. And that gives us hope. And it prevents us from becoming judgmental toward others and saying, oh, that person sucks, he's awful. Give him time. Give everyone time. Every saint has a past and every sinner has a future.
I like that. It should be a t-shirt.
Probably is. It's like that t-shirt which says, God is dead, Nietzsche.
Yeah.
Nietzsche is dead, God. Okay, another big question. And I'm not going to go into details. I go into some more details in the book itself in chapter 2. But the moment we talk about the doctrine of karma, some people, they get this worry. Well, if you push karma too far, do we have free will? Do we still have free will at the end of the day? Or is everything determined by our karma, good, bad, or otherwise, or neutral? It's a very deep question. And again, there's no one Hindu answer to this question. That's an important thing that I emphasize in chapter 2 of this book. Okay? So you get a whole spectrum of views on this. And this is where Jeff's research helped me, actually, with Paramahamsa Yogananda. Because he seems to hold the view that the doctrine of karma, which he fully accepts, is perfectly compatible with limited free will. It's not that we have unfettered free will, that we can do whatever we want. We're limited, we're constrained in certain ways because of our karma. But at the same time, we still have some scope for free will. Okay? That seems to be Yoganandaji's view. And he also adds, this unfortunately, I think I had to delete it because of the word limit. He also says, the closer we come to God, the more spiritual progress we make, the more free will we have, the more freedom we have. So it's a dynamic kind of understanding of how much free will we have. It evolves with our spiritual evolution as well. Okay, so that seems to be Yoganandaji's view. But there are many other views. And Prabhupada, for instance, also accepts. Prabhupada, this ISKCON, the founder of ISKCON, Hare Krishna movement, he says that we have limited free will, and that's compatible with the law of karma. Now, at the other extreme of the spectrum, we get a lot of Advaita Vedantas, like Ramana Maharshi, like Nisargadatta Maharshi. Somebody asked Nisargadatta Maharshi, and I am that, hey, we have free will, don't we? He goes, He just says very bluntly, he says, there is no such thing as free will in Hinduism. He says, almost as blunt as Swami Vivekananda, who says free will is a misnomer. You can look it up. Free will is a misnomer. The will can't be free. It's determined. Any kind of volition is determined by prior causes. And Swami Vivekananda, this might be surprising to some of you who have not possibly read the entire 9-volume complete works, and I don't blame you. I've written an entire academic article on this, which will be coming out in a few months, hopefully. Let me give you a little background on that. Aurangzeb Chakraborty is a very famous scholar of Indian philosophy. And there's a fest trip that's going to be published in his honor. What's a fest trip? That's a fancy German word, which means a book commemorating the life and legacy of a great scholar. Okay. And so they asked me to contribute a chapter on it. He did some really pioneering work on Sri Ramakrishna's and Swami Vivekananda's views on free will. Okay. And building on that work and critically engaging that work, I've written an essay explaining Swami Vivekananda's views on free will. And I argue that Swami Vivekananda upholds a very, very strong karmic determinism, which means that the law of karma literally determines everything we do, say, and think. Down to any thought that comes up in our head, that's because of karma as well. That we have absolutely no free will. Okay, that's one part of the answer. But you have to understand his views in the context of his guru, Sri Ramakrishna's teachings on free will. What did Sri Ramakrishna say? This is a whole other talk, actually. And if you want, I've got multiple talks on this on YouTube. You can find it. Medhanananda on the free will, you'll find it. But I'm giving a very brief answer because we have a lot more to cover here. Okay, so Sri Ramakrishna's view is, in reality, we don't have free will. But so long as we have not realized God, we cannot help but feel that we're free, and therefore morally responsible for our actions. Do you follow? So long as I'm ignorant, so long as I have not realized God, God has actually wisely implanted in us the illusion of free will in order to prevent us from committing even more stupid actions and mistakes. Okay, doing more stupid things than we already do. Okay, because if we knew as ignorant people that we have no free will, we'll just have a field day, right? Okay, but he says, he distinguishes 3 standpoints. The agyani, that's a Sanskrit term for the ignorant person, the one who has not realized God. That person feels he or she is free and morally responsible, but in reality is not. Okay. Second standpoint, the jnani, or the jivan mukta. The jivan mukta is the one who has attained liberation while still in the physical body. And Sri Ramakrishna defines the jivan mukta as the one who realizes in his or her heart of hearts that God alone is the doer. God alone is the doer. And that we're just instruments in the hands of God. The jivan mukta, when you realize God, you realize that. We have no free will. We thought we had free will. And then it turns out when we realize God, no, God was the doer all along. But interestingly, that's not his ultimate standpoint. He adds a third standpoint, the standpoint of the vijnani. So here are the 3 terms. The agyani, which means the ignorant person who has not yet realized God. The jivan mukta, the person who has attained liberation, who has realized God and is still in the physical body. Who realizes, wait, I have no free will. God alone is the doer. But you're happy about it because, you're a blissful instrument of God. The third standpoint is the vijnani. He says the vijnani realizes there's nothing but God. And then, well, what about the chair? What about each of us? We are also different manifestations of God, of the same divine. So for the vijnani, to the extent that the vijnani can identify with the divine consciousness, the vijnani inherits God's free will. God definitely has free will. If anybody has free will, God has it. If there's nothing but God, then suddenly, if we can identify with God, then we have God's free will. We're free as God. We're not free as body-mind complexes. We're not free as egos, but we're free as the divine. Okay, so that's the complete picture of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda's view. And the law of karma has been pushed in different directions, as I said. So Paramahamsa Yogananda, Prabhupada will say, yeah, law of karma is still compatible with limited free will. Another person who believes that is a modern Hindu figure named Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. He's a famous philosopher, and he held the same kind of view. He says the law of karma means that if all my habits are towards smoking a cigarette, it might be incredibly difficult not to reach for a cigarette again because of that habit, because of the samskaras, that's the law of karma. But still, we still have a modicum of free will that gives us, there's a little bit of window, a little bit of leeway for us to resist that temptation and avoid picking up that cigarette and smoking. Okay. It might be very, very difficult, he says. It's very, very difficult because all our samskaras are moving in one direction, and it's like we're fighting against the current, which is not easy, but it's still doable. It's not impossible. And then there are others, as I said, at the other extreme, who say that the law of karma is completely determinative, which doesn't mean that there's no scope for self-effort. Remember, because from our standpoint, we haven't yet attained enlightenment. We still feel free. Even if we make all sorts of theoretical arguments. Robert Sapolsky, he's a professor at Stanford. He's written a fat book called Determined. The whole book is making this very sophisticated scientific case for radical determinism. We have no free will whatsoever. And you know what he says in one place in the book? He says, I believed this view since I was a teenager, that we have no free will. And yet, the moment I get off my chair, I feel I'm free. There's a funny kind of discrepancy here. Intellectually, I can understand something, and yet in practice, I can't help but feel the opposite. And Sri Ramakrishna understood this. He said this. This is part of his view, actually. Okay, so keep that in mind. Another question. This is the one about the banana slug. Is it possible for a human being, for the soul of a human being, to regress to a non-human animal birth or to a plant birth in a future birth? Interesting question, which I bet has occurred to some of you. Right? Could I be born as a banana slug? Here again, no one Hindu answer to this question. And fascinatingly, in our own tradition, in this very tradition, different swamis have given different answers. And I'll just give you an example. I don't want to create trouble here, but, I kind of do. I do. Okay. So on the one hand, the great Swami Medhanandaji, what's his answer? Somebody asked him this question point blank. Because of course it's possible to regress. If you behave like a beast, you'll be reborn as a beast. Most likely. Really. That's what he said. If you behave like an animal, you might very well be reborn as an animal. What's the problem? It's logical. It's part of the logic of the doctrine of karma. Another direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna named Swami Medhananandaji gives exactly the opposite answer because he's written several books on karma and rebirth. He says, no, it's not possible to regress from a human birth to a subhuman birth, whether that's a non-human animal or a plant birth. Not possible. So that's interesting. And within the same tradition, there can be a divergence of answers, let alone in the broader context of Hinduism in different figures. Okay, so different Hindu texts and different Hindu figures have different answers. Take the answer that you like. It's always safe. Okay, I want to give you, because we don't have too much time, I want to talk about some of the main arguments in support of karma and rebirth. I bet some of you have thought about some of these arguments, but I want to give like pretty rigorous accounts of what these arguments are. And then also, that's what I discussed that in chapter 3 of this book. And then in chapter 4, I look at some of the arguments against karma and rebirth. And some of them I bet you probably thought about. But you might not know how might I respond to these objections too. So I want to get into some of that, nitty gritty. Okay, one argument. It's what's called the argument from innate aptitudes and dispositions. Okay, a baby just has, this is an argument that you can find in that same Nyaya tradition I was talking about earlier. You find it in Nyaya texts. It says, look, a newborn baby instinctively feels drawn toward the mother's breast to take milk. How does it know? It's instinct. It was born with that instinct. Nobody taught it that it'll get milk by doing that. But it knows. You know, a duck when it's born, how does it learn how to swim? It's instinct, right? And so what these Hindu thinkers claim is that that's because of samskaras that were generated from doing those actions in a previous birth. That newborn baby lived as an infant in past lifetimes, and it got mother's milk in the same way, and so that's why it automatically and instinctively reached for the mother's breast in this life. Okay, so that's one kind of argument. Some more modern Hindu figures make a kind of variation on this argument, which is kind of interesting. Think about somebody like Mozart, child genius. It's a very interesting phenomenon. Right? They're rare, but they're still, we know that they're examples. There are other examples you can probably think of, Pascal and others. How in the world at the age of 5 can somebody compose a sophisticated piece of music, for instance, and play the piano that Mozart did? Karma gives a very simple answer. Because he played a lot of piano and composed music in his past life, right? So this is one argument. One kind of intuitive objection that a modern scientist can make to this is kind of obvious, but we don't need karma, some highfalutin metaphysical doctrine of karma to explain all this. Heredity explains it, right? Heredity explains why the newborn reaches for his mother's breast. It explains why Mozart happens to be a child genius. Well, he just got good genes. He lucked out. He won the genetic lottery. Okay. Swami Medhanananda, fortunately, lived at a time when heredity was already in the air. Okay, this is post-Darwin and all that. So he took this into account, and he wrote a whole essay. He wrote an entire essay on reincarnation, published in the Metaphysical Magazine. And I don't think it exists anymore, but it's a kind of scholarly essay where he addresses this objection. And what he says is, the Hindu doctrine of karma is perfectly happy with heredity. It's not incompatible with heredity. We're happy, Hindus are happy to accept the doctrine of heredity. And he gives an example. He says, when a soul leaves the physical body and is ready for a new one, it takes into account the genetic makeup. He doesn't use the word genes because that comes later, right? But it's the hereditary makeup, let's say, of the body the next body is going to inhabit. And part of its criteria, selection criteria for which body will I inhabit, is based on the heredity of that body, And he gives a kind of crude example, but he says, somebody who is a drunk, an alcoholic in one life, the soul of that drunkard will gravitate toward somebody with genes for alcoholism, like who's prone to alcoholism, because that's what they did in the past life. Okay, so heredity is actually compatible with the doctrine of karma. But there's another side to this answer. This gets into like scientific discussion, which I'm not qualified. It's above my pay grade because I'm not a scientist. But there's a problem called the missing heritability problem. Talked about extensively by biologists and geneticists even now. Okay, if you look it up, missing heritability problem, you'll find it. Genetic science has developed to a great extent since Swamiji's time. It's been over 125 years or whatever, and yet it hasn't been able to explain things like IQ, all sorts of things. Especially mental qualities, aptitude for certain skills, being very good at chess. Can't explain any of this. That's what's called the missing heritability problem. And so karma can help us to explain these things that genetics has not yet been able to explain. Okay, that's another part of the answer. Now, another quite different argument is what's called the argument from verified past life memories. It's a really interesting argument. And the main researchers in this area are, at least on the Western side, are Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker, who's still living, and he's a professor at the University of Virginia now in the Department of Perceptual Study. He's done really interesting work on this. If you are interested, please look on Amazon for a book by Jim Tucker called Before, Children's Memories of Past Lives. And it's a combination of 2 books. You get 2 books for the price of one. And he talks about a lot of fascinating cases, and I'll just mention one. James Leininger, who's probably in his 20s now, I'm not sure. At the age of 2, he wakes up in the middle of the night with nightmares. And he says, Mayday, Mayday, plane on fire, plane on fire. Plane's crashing, plane's crashing. And his parents think what's going on? And they ignore it, as parents usually do. Yeah, recurring nightmare. And then finally, when he's awake, they ask him, they say, you know what you're saying at night? You're saying these weird things like your plane's on fire. He goes, oh yeah, that's because I was James, I was a fighter pilot, World War II fighter pilot in my last life. And then he started giving details. His aircraft carrier was called Natoma. He used the word Natoma, Natoma. I had a friend named Jack. He gave all these details. His parents are obviously astonished. His father, this is pre-Google days, he looks up, he goes into history textbooks about World War II, finds out there's a guy by the name of, the name that he gave, Jack Larson, that he had a friend named so-and-so, that he belonged to the USS aircraft carrier, USS Natoma Bay, that he fought against the Japanese in World War II and his fighter plane was shot down and he was killed. So this is very interesting and growing. It's a growing body of evidence in support of the doctrine of karma and rebirth, actually. Okay. There's some really, really fascinating cases. Another example of cases that they talk about, and especially that his guru, his scientific guru, Ian Stevenson, talked about. He has a whole book on this called xenoglossia. Does anyone know what the word xenoglossia means? X-E-N-O. You know the word xenophobia, for instance. It means others, aliens. Xenophobics are people who are afraid of immigrants, for instance. So xenoglossia. Xenoglossia means, so glossia, that's like language. It means language, linguistic abilities. Xenoglossia means the ability to speak a language that you never learned in this lifetime. How remarkable. There are some really, really fascinating cases of this, right? Let's say I never learned Chinese. Suddenly I just start speaking some Chinese. Nobody ever taught me Chinese. It's not an easy language to learn, and I never learned it. How? Why? And then, so there's a case, for instance, of this woman who was raised in Maharashtra, where the main language is Marathi. So she knows Marathi, she knows Hindi. Suddenly, in her middle age, she will just suddenly start speaking Bengali, which is a language she never learned. And she identifies as a Bengali woman, a peasant woman from the 19th century, and she starts talking in this quaint village Bengali dialect, speaking fluent Bengali, and she can hold conversations with people in Bengali. And she doesn't even identify with the Marathi identity in this lifetime. And so this is, again, another arguably strong source of evidence for Karma and Rebirth. Okay, xenoglossia. That's a term you can use to impress your friends at party.
Wait, can I write that down?
Yeah. So XENOGLOSSIA. All right. And okay, there are a few other arguments, but for limited time, I'm going to skip them because I want to talk about some of the objections against Karma and Rebirth, and then I want us to think about how we might respond to them. Okay, one obvious objection to Karma and Rebirth. It's what's called the lack of memory objection. It means, well, if we had past lives, why don't we remember them? Some people might have or claim to have memories of past lives, but the vast majority of human beings have no memories of their past lives. I certainly don't. I don't know about you guys. Some of you might actually. Okay, but most of us don't. That's an empirical fact. How do you respond? How might you respond to this? Well, Hindus have three lines of response here. Okay, the first one is memory is not always a reliable indicator of personal continuity, which means, what does that mean? I'll give you a simple example. How many of you remember anything from when you were 3 weeks old? Anyone? Any takers? I don't remember anything that I did or thought at age 3 weeks. Now, is it logical to conclude that I didn't exist? 3 weeks after I was born? No. Of course. So just because I don't have memories of something doesn't mean that I didn't exist at that time. Okay, this is the first kind of response. Second, thank God we don't have memories of what we did in our past lives. This is the second line of response. Sister Nivedita asked Swami Medhanandaji once, why don't we have memories of past life? He says, he quoted Jesus, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. We've done enough stupid things in this life, let alone if we had to carry the emotional, psychological baggage of what we did in our past lives, we'd become basket cases. We might not be able to function. Right? So it's good that we can make a fresh start. Right? Clean slate. That doesn't mean that we're, tabula rasa, that we don't have some skatas. No, but still, we're not burdened with the memory of all that stuff. Okay? Because there's so many lifetimes that we've already lived. It would be overwhelming. And a third thing, it's something that Swami Medhanandaji adds, which is quite interesting. He says, even if most of us don't have memories of our past lives now, eventually in our last birth, in our final birth before liberation, we will regain that memory of our past lives when we're ready for it and when it's useful. Okay.
I'm sorry, Swamiji, can you say that one more time?
Yeah. So the third line of response is something that Swami Medhanandaji says, and there are other Hindu thinkers who say the same thing, which is that even if most of us don't have memories of our past lives in this birth, eventually, right before liberation, we will get that. We'll regain memories of our past lives. So if any of you are familiar with the life of Buddha, that's part of his life actually. After he gets nirvana, he gets this kind of memories of his past lives, all of his past lives. Okay, and so even if we don't have it now, it's a kind of promissory note. We'll get it eventually, so calm down. Okay. Now, another really intuitive objection here, which it really worries a lot of Hindu thinkers. And so I think we need to think deeply about it. It's what's called, I give these names, and I think some other people call it that, but the blame the victim objection. This is a very serious objection. Okay, according to the doctrine of karma, each of us reaps what we sow. That we ourselves have sown. We get what we deserve, in other words. If that's the case, that means when anybody suffers, an onlooker will say, yeah, he had what was coming. Right? This is the objection. It pulls a rug out from any attempt to help people in suffering, to serve those in need. This is a very interesting objection, actually, and one that we should really think about. Right? How would a Hindu who believes in karma and rebirth respond to this objection? Okay. Number one, if I witness somebody suffering, that means what? That I'm in a position to help that person. Which means what? From the sufferer standpoint, it's because of that sufferer's bad karma that they're undergoing that suffering. But at the same time, it's the result of that sufferer's good karma that there's somebody in the vicinity of that person who can help that person. We can't be selective in applying the law of karma here. And we should be very careful about not playing God here. And we're saying that we understand everybody's karma and what they deserve and what they don't deserve. No, this is crazy. If we see somebody suffering, it means that we're in a position to help that person. And that it's because of that person's good karma that we're in a position to help them. And if we do nothing, we accrue bad karma. We will accrue bad karma if we ignore that person and we just walk on. Okay. And so it's in our interest to generate good karma and in light of their own good karma that we're in their vicinity to help that person. Yeah.
And also, as Christ would say it, when we help that person, we release our own matching karma.
Well, Christ doesn't talk about karma, does he? Did you say Christ? Or,
I did.
okay, but so I don't think he uses the word karma.
No, he doesn't use the word karma, but that's what it translates to.
I see. Okay.
That when you reach out and help someone else through that action.
Right,
you're
it comes back to
releasing
you.
your own.
Yeah, yeah.
You're
It's like paying it
releasing-
forward or something,
Like,
right? Isn't
like
there a movie
the
about
same as forgiveness. When you forgive another, you're
Yeah.
forgiving yourself.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. What goes around comes around, that kind of idea. Absolutely.
And not quite literally, like when you're able to, according to him, we hold ourselves, not God, but we hold ourselves responsible for our misdeeds. So when you're able to see that misdeed in someone else and
Yeah.
forgive them in any form that it takes, you're literally releasing your own stuff, forgiving yourself.
Yeah.
And it can apply to any law of karma.
Yeah. No, I think that's
Giving
right.
is
Yeah.
receiving.
Yeah, sure, absolutely, yeah. Another kind of objection to karma and rebirth is what's called the population explosion objection. Right? This is a very intuitive objection. What was the human population in the 1960s? I don't know what it was, 2 billion, 3 billion. Now it's way more. Where are all those souls coming from to inhabit those extra human bodies? Very intuitive question. What do you think? How would you answer that?
Cumulative.
Okay, you speak in sentences.
Okay.
This is rapid fire answers.
If you figure, yeah, if you figure over thousands of years, so many people have come and gone, and then they all reincarnate at a time.
Recycle.
I'm having trouble understanding what the answer
Reincarnate at
is
the
here.
same time because.
Well, here's the problem, right? Go back to year 0 or 5,000 BC or something, BCE, and there were far fewer human beings, right? And we have a huge number of them now. So where are those souls coming from to inhabit those bodies? That's the objection. Okay. Anyone else want to take a stab at it? Huh?
Plants and animals.
Very good. That's an important part of the answer. There are 2 key dimensions to the answer. One is souls inhabit not only human bodies, but also the bodies of non-human animals like dogs and cats and tigers and bears. And plants are ensouled. Plants have souls. This has enormous implications for environmental ethics and consciousness, ecological consciousness. Plants have souls. That means that they have moral standing, that we should treat them like souls. What an extraordinary thing. It just changes our whole way of thinking about the environment, right? Okay, so that's one part of the answer. Can you guess what the other part of the answer is?
There's souls that have yet to. It's such a long timeline that we can't even comprehend the level of souls that exist or haven't even.
Or
Okay.
they're in a holding.
Well, they're all eternal.
Right.
I mean, souls are eternal.
Yes. Right.
Oh,
So what's the answer?
Are they in a holding? They're in a
Like in
holding
the other
place,
locus?
then-
Very good. There we go.
Oh,
Exactly. I think you're on the right track.
Yeah,
That's what it is. Exactly. The Earth is only one of many locus, L-O-K-A-S, realm. There are many other realms, many other locus. A above us, below us, temporary heaven. So if a soul did some good karma in a past birth, they're hanging out in a temporary heaven, right? Not all souls, and then eventually they're gonna have to come back. And Swami Medhanananda makes a really interesting point along these lines. He says, it is a significant fact that as the human population is increasing, the animal population is decreasing. The animal souls are all becoming men. It's really interesting. Now, how he could possibly have done the empirical research on this to figure out that the animal population is decreasing, Lord knows, but anyway, but you can understand the idea, which is that a combination of there being many lokas, many different realms other than this earth, in addition to this earth, and the fact that souls can inhabit not only human bodies but also the non-human animals and plants. That accounts for these extra human bodies. Okay. And finally, I wanted to talk about some of the. So in chapter 5 of this book, it's a short chapter 5 again because of the word limit. But I talk about some of the contemporary implications of these doctrines of karma and rebirth. Why should we care about them? And one of them has to do with the problem of evil. This is one of these big problems in philosophy and theology, in any religious tradition that accepts God. It becomes a big problem. If God loves us and God is omnipotent, why does he permit us to suffer so much? Why is there so much suffering in the world? Huge problem. The law of karma combined with rebirth and universal liberation go a long way towards solving this problem. I make that case in detail in chapter 7 and 8 of a totally different book called Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality, Sri Ramakrishna Cross-Cultural Philosophy of Religion. At least one person in the room has read the book. Thank you. So I'm not going to go. That's another separate talk. So I'm not going to go to the answer. But here's just like take a case: a 2-year-old baby with something fatal, like cerebral meningitis, and suffers for months and months, and then finally dies. How does Christianity explain the suffering of that poor 2-year-old? How does Islam? How does Judaism? The Orthodox forms of these religions, these Abrahamic religions, don't believe in karma and rebirth. Now, I mean, you're claiming
God's
to
will.
but it's
They say
complicated.
God's will.
Well, they say it's God's will. Is that a satisfactory answer? Because that's the whole problem. Why does God will such heinous things? What did that 2-year-old baby do to deserve that? And the law of karma says you don't know what the soul of that baby did in the past birth. Now, does that mean you should beat up on that baby and dump it? No. The idea is that through that suffering that the baby undergoes, it's exhausting its bad karma. And the soul of that baby never dies. So after it dies, it doesn't die. The body drops off. The soul leaves and then will take up another body. And because it's exhausted that bad karma, it'll be born in much more favorable circumstances to make further spiritual progress. What a beautiful answer, right? So that's one massive, I think, implication, philosophical and theological implication of believing in karma and rebirth, is that it just takes the edge off the problem of evil. It's an obsession with the Abrahamic religions, especially Christianity, but you don't find it even barely talked about in the Hindu context because, it's karma. Okay. Another thing, and this is a whole another discussion, but if you're interested, we could talk about it in the Q&A. Western thought, starting with Christianity, is guilty of, many people claim this, and I think they're right, guilty of what's called speciesism, okay? Believing that a particular species is superior to all the rest. What is that species? It's kind of obvious. The human species. They put humans on a pedestal. Okay, what does the Bible say? Man alone, human beings alone, were created in the image of God. Tough luck, dogs, cats, tigers, bears, insects. No, not created in the image of God. And the greatest Western philosophers many of them were Christian. And even if they're not, they're strongly influenced by Christianity. And so some of the major Western philosophers, like Descartes, what was his view? Human beings alone have souls. And then, how do you explain tigers roaming around the jungle and this and that? He says, they're automata, robots. They don't have souls. They're soulless robots, soulless automata. Like now these Boston Dynamics or Boston Robotics, and what's the company, the thing that's making these like scary AI dogs? Yeah. And these other things, like Elon Musk is also investing in these, like we make these humanoid robots. soulless automata. So this is Descartes' answer. Kant says the same thing. He says human beings alone have souls, and so we can exploit nature to our heart's content, and we can do whatever we want with animals because they don't have souls. So who cares? In the way that you can argue that an AI robot, you can do whatever you want because it's not conscious. So who cares what we do? So the TV show Westworld raises these ethical questions actually. If something is a humanoid, a perfectly humanoid robot, you can't, like externally, it looks exactly like a human being. Okay. So do you have any ethical obligations toward that AI humanoid entity? Yes or no? This gets very tricky actually. Okay. So anyway, fortunately on the Hindu side, because we believe in karma and rebirth, Vedanta believes in karma and rebirth, we reject speciesism. We don't put human beings on a pedestal in that way. And we say all animals, including non-human animals, have souls. Even plants have souls, which will transform the way we look at the environment and the way that we treat the environment. If we really think about and internalize what the doctrines of karma and rebirth really mean, right? Okay. So that's one thing that I talk about in chapter 5 of the book. And I always try to end my talks, most of my talks, with practical payoff, for spiritual aspects. Because at the end of the day, we come to these kinds of Vedanta centers for spiritual upliftment, for practical benefits, advice. How do we grow spiritually? Here's the thing. I bet many of you before this already believed in karma and rebirth. But I find that there are many Hindus who believe in karma and rebirth as just a kind of theoretical belief. It doesn't percolate into their day-to-day lives. So I want to make the case that if you really take seriously these doctrines of karma and rebirth, that it should completely transform the way we live our day-to-day lives and the way we look upon ourselves and the way we look at other people. Okay, let me just give you a few examples because we don't have much time. For instance, one massive implication, one of the biggest fears. What is one of the biggest fears that human beings have? Fear of death, fear of dying. If you really believe that you're an eternal soul, separate from this body-mind complex, and that when you die, you don't actually die, consciousness doesn't just stop existing. You will continue, and you're going to take up another body. If you really, there's a reason why I started this talk with that beautiful passage from the Gita, chapter 2. If you really believe that you are an eternal conscious soul and that you're going to give up this physical body eventually, just as you cast off this pair of clothes at the end of a long day and then you put on a new pair of clothes, your pajamas. If you really believe that, would you fear dying? Would you fear dying for your loved ones? You wouldn't. You'd be happy, right? So if you really internalize the doctrines of karma and rebirth, so I have a Gita class called Bhagavad Gita in the Light of Sri Ramakrishna. And I'm an inveterate, I'm a hopeless scholar and a teacher. And so I assign homework as part of the class. And so I even have like a Google form, which I ask them to fill out before the next class. And I go through all their answers. And I'm blessed with some really brilliant students, very thoughtful students who do their homework. What the Gita's doctrine teachings on karma and rebirth were. How, if at all, do the doctrines of karma and rebirth help you in your day-to-day spiritual life? And I have one student who, his name is Ellis. He's an actor, but kind of this brilliant Renaissance man. So I want to share with you some of his answers. His answer, one part of his answer is, the doctrine of rebirth is a great solace when it comes to how I view mortality. I used to fear death for myself and loved ones, but the doctrine of rebirth has helped to ease that. Okay. Another thing, if we really internalize, if we truly believed in the doctrines of karma and rebirth, our primary identity should be not as this physical body. It should not even be as minds, but as eternal souls. We should look at ourselves as souls. We should look at other people as souls. So instead of thinking of us as, the goal is to have a spiritual experience. I'm a human being striving for a spiritual experience. We are spiritual. It's just a souls having human experiences. Do we really feel other people? Or do we look at other people as bodies or as minds? So if we really internalize karma and rebirth, we start looking at ourselves and other people's souls. Many other things, but I wanted to mention a couple of things. Like, for instance, each of you is here because you have some spiritual interests, right? And yet, each one of us sitting here might have wildly different spiritual philosophies, spiritual preferences. One person loves Christ, another one loves Allah, another one loves Ganesha, another one loves Kali. Kali Puja is coming up soon. Another one says, I don't care about any of these gods. I don't believe in God, but I'm an Advaita. Another one says, I don't even believe in the Atman. I'm a Buddhist. Why? Where do these differences in spiritual temperament come from? Karma and Rebirth explain it. We were spiritual aspirants in past lives along a certain line. And we're continuing that line. So that when we take to spiritual life, we're going to feel naturally drawn towards certain kinds of spiritual practices, a certain conception of the divine, and so on and so forth. Whether that's formless or with form, what form, so many things. Why was I drawn to this tradition? Because of what I did in a past birth. Right? So these doctrines also help us to understand ourselves in a much deeper way. Another example. Raising children. Many of you are parents. How might it change the way that you look at your kids, raise your kids? Let me share with you the same. My brilliant student, Ellis, he gives this answer because he has a son. He says, I think karma and rebirth have changed my views about raising children. The idea that I am nurturing a soul that has been here many times and is on its own specific journey helps me to view parenting with more of a stewardship and guidance lens and not a possessive mentality. I see no need to create a carbon copy, shape a child completely to my own ideals, or save them from eternal damnation. I understand that a soul may have chosen me to help them along in this part of their journey. It's a subtle but powerful shift. This is his very thoughtful answer to the question. As a parent, this is amazing, right? If you think about it, if you use the doctrine of the three gunas, I'd probably give a talk here at some point on the three gunas: sattva, rajas, and tamas. Okay, tamasic parenting is negligent parenting. Do whatever you want, I don't care. Not the best parent. Rajasic parenting is helicopter parenting, or now they're like different paradigms, snowplow parenting, and this and that. But overbearing. You try to mold your kid in your own image. I'm a computer science, therefore you have to be computer science. That strikes close to home. My dad made me enroll at Berkeley as a computer science major. But he's not a computer science, he was a mechanical engineer. But anyway. Okay, and then sattvic parenting. What Ellis is talking about is sattvic parenting. You realize that your kid, the soul of your kid, is on his or her own spiritual journey. Your job is to be the steward of your kid. Try to help that kid's soul, your child's soul, on his or her unique spiritual journey. Her journey is not the same as your journey. So less dictating and more fostering, facilitating, helping them along, and seeing them as souls rather than as body minds that are yours in some deep, self-assess, right? So yeah, anyway, I'll stop with that because I think I've gone for probably more than an hour. But I hope that I've given you some practical tips on how you can kind of internalize and incorporate these doctrines of karma and rebirth into your day-to-day life, into our day-to-day lives. And at the same time, think about some of these arguments for karma and rebirth, against karma and rebirth, and some of the nuances. Who or what exactly is reborn? Might we be reborn as a banana slug in the future? And so on. And for more details, buy the book.
And get insight.
Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Namastu. All right, so I've talked a lot, and I'd love to hear from you now.
Questions?
Karma and rebirth.
Questions?
How many of you already believed the doctrines before you came today? Many of you, right? Yeah. So do you learn anything new?
Yes.
Yeah, a few new things. Okay, good. So what were some of the new things? I'm curious before I get to your question.
Well, actually, can I ask a question?
Yes, please,
before?
ask.
Okay,
Ask away.
so the thought came to me when you were talking about the different lokas and the souls and, where they come from, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of karma, when we're in this loka, this plane, can you sow and reap karma in other lokas?
Yeah.
Or is it just here?
No. Yeah. Okay. Great question. Yeah. So I talk about it in the book, and there's a verse in the Gita. There's several verses which talk about Krishna gives examples. And one example is, I accrue some good karma as a human being on this earth. Okay, in this birth, let's say. What happens? In between lifetimes, I go to a temporary heaven where I exhaust my good karma for a while. It's really nice. It's all positive. Here we have a mixture of positive and negative, and that's why we can grow and evolve. They're what Sri Aurobindo calls typal worlds, Typal, which means there's no scope for growth in these temporary heavens and hells. You're just exhausting good karma in these temporary heavens, and you're exhausting bad karma in temporary hells. With the purpose of then finally taking birth again here, where there's a mixture of good and bad and positive and negative, and then we continue our spiritual journey. That's the idea.
Okay.
Yeah. Can we turn down the temperature a little bit? I feel like it feels a little stuffy.
That's fine.
You said something that's just gonna stay with me now. It's more of a, when you said that, you see a person in trouble,
Yeah.
and then the whole dynamic of the you're there for them.
Yeah, and that's part of their
they're
good
there
karma.
for you.
Yeah, exactly. We're here
so
for each other.
Act on
Yeah.
it, and don't forget that
Yeah.
when you see that. Don't just I
Right,
can't help.
right.
I don't want anything.
He
to
got
do
what he
with
deserves.
that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna remember that. every
Yeah.
time I see
Another way to
something.
put it
It's a
is-
great way.
In each of our individual karma is interconnected with everyone else's karma in incredibly and unfathomably complex ways, which we can't begin to unravel. Gahana Karmanogati. In the Gita, there's a beautiful statement which says mysterious workings of karma. So we should never play God and think that, I figured out this guy deserves money. No, we don't. We're there because our karma is connected with that person's. Yeah. That's good.
In Hinduism, they say that if you do good karma or bad karma, whatever the good karma is good, you get the fruits in the same birth. If you do bad karma, you will have to face the same consequences in same birth. What is your opinion on that? I mean,
No.
it says that everything, whatever you did, if you did good, you have a nice death or whatever it is. And if you do the bad karma, then you suffer. Say, for you are a smoker, you with lungs cancer or whatever it is, and you die in a hospital. If you're like
Right. Yeah.
what is your thought on that? Like,
Right,
you have
yeah.
to suffer only in this karma at this time only,
Right. Yeah. No.
good or bad.
The standard Hindu answer is not that. The answer is either you reap what you sow later in this life or in a future birth. There are these two possibilities. It's not that you have to reap everything, all the good things you've done, you reap them in this life. All the bad things you've done, you reap them in this life. No, that's false. Some of it you will reap in this life. Some of it will be held off until your next birth. That's the standard Hindu answer.
Who decides that?
God. God is in Vedanta. Now again, actually, different Hindu traditions will give you different answers. Because some Hindu traditions don't believe in God.
That's what I'm saying.
So, but then, yeah. So the point is, there's one Hindu answer to that. Okay. So Sankhya, for instance, doesn't believe in a God. Okay. Either it's agnostic or it's atheist. They don't believe that God is the karma paladata. That's the Sanskrit term for God is a dispenser of the fruits of our karmas. That's the Vedantic answer. Sankhya says, no need. Karma itself it's a kind of mechanical law that just works itself out mysteriously. But there could be an objection to that, saying, well, how does something mysteriously work itself out in this magical way? You need to have a conscious being, a supreme being, actually pulling the strings from behind. Somebody to govern the workings of the law of karma. And so Vedanta says, you have to posit God, who is the one who basically follows the law of karma. But God is the one. You need an omniscient and omnipotent being, right, to be able to fill that role, right? I can't be the one to dispense karma because I don't know. I don't have that omniscient mind. And I don't have the capacity. I'm not omnipotent. So I don't, even if I knew, even if I was omniscient, I'm not omnipotent and I won't be able to distribute the fruits to everybody. God alone can do that. So God alone fills that role. And God, via the law of karma, determines what I'll reap in this life and what I'll reap in future lives. One rule of thumb in some Hindu traditions that the more egregious the action, if it's a really bad action, you'll reap what you sow in this lifetime. If it's really, really hideous, like heinous. And if it's mild or moderate, you might only experience the fruits of it in the future birth. But that's not a hard and fast rule. That's just one way of thinking about why you reap what you sow sometimes in this lifetime and why some of them are put off to a future birth. But these things are very complex and there are different answers.
What about the role of grace?
Kripa.
How that's going to
Very good. Great question. And now I'm privileged to be able to mention one of the teachings of our Holy Mother Sharandevi. She says, if due to the law of karma, due to this principle, this karmic principle, we reap what we sow, we are destined to get a wound the size of a plowshare being this massive farming machine. By the grace of God, what you're asking, kripa, the size of that wound can be reduced to a pinprick. And the pain of that wound can be reduced to a pinprick. That means it's not completely eliminated, but it can be greatly mitigated by God's grace. Okay. So through spiritual practices, right? That's why in chapter 9 of the Gita, Krishna says, Apichet suduracharo bhajate mam ananyabhak sadhureva samantavila samik vavsavisa, which means even somebody who has committed the worst and most heinous sins, if that person starts to worship God, that person, by the grace of God, can become a great saint. Right? Because by the grace of God, those bad karmas will be mitigated, not completely eliminated, but mitigated. So that's the purpose of spiritual practice, actually, is to mitigate the negative karmic consequences of our past actions, basically, so that we can make spiritual progress, further spiritual progress. Thank you. Other questions?
If there's nothing but God, anything is possible, right? Anything is possible.
Oh yeah, okay. This is another.
God is omniscient, omnipotent.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. So in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, there's another conversation that takes place about karma, where somebody says, because Sri Ramakrishna, he holds the view, the Vedantic view, that God has created the law of karma. Okay. So then there's this question. He goes, well, so if God has created the law of karma, can't he suspend, like, either suspend the consequences of karma or mitigate them? And Sri Ramakrishna says, yes, he who has created the law can also violate the law, right? That's true of any rule. If you're the rule maker, you can also break the rules, right? So he says, yes, God is like that, exactly. And that's linked to the answer, the question that you're asking. So the idea is that's the whole point. That's why bhakti is so powerful. If you practice devotion and you cultivate devotion toward God through prayer, through coming to these kinds of programs and so on and so forth, japa, mental repetition of a mantra, all these different, and singing beautiful devotional songs like the ones we heard at the beginning. What happens? First of all, we are tapping into God's grace. And secondly, by means of God's grace and also through these activities, we are reducing our bad karma, actually. And we're replacing our bad karma with good karma. We're replacing our bad samskaras with good spiritual samskaras as well, which will eventually become habits. And then you're going to feel like, I missed 1 week of the Vedanta Society in Las Vegas, and I couldn't really, you feel like the way that some people, like addicts, will feel like, I need a cigarette, please. I need that Vedanta Sunday talk or whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. Jesus said the same thing. He said, "She loved much, so much was forgiven."
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of goes different areas in different ways. It's awesome.
Yeah. No, I think we're on the same page here on that. Yeah. So that's the beauty of spiritual practice, is that it's not a mechanical law, right? That's the thing. Because God, there's a conscious, loving being behind this law of karma. And by God's grace, each one of us will become saints. It's true.
One thing, to me, the Bible, no offense to anybody, it's more of a historical records of an era rather than the spiritual teachings. Also, Christ himself has a lot of golden nuggets in the Bible. and I also, in his new book, A Course in Miracles, he offers a lot of teachings. And that to me is Christ's teaching. He says, when questions about the law of karma, he says, if one incarnation is possible, it's possible to have many. So I'm saying that because a lot of references that are made to the Old Testament, New Testament, or the Quran, these are old books. A lot of they're more of historical records. We don't really know what the actual teacher said,
Okay.
because a lot of it,
Yeah.
they didn't write it down.
Right. No, I think that's a good point. I mean, that's true of every religious tradition, but at the same, so not just the Abrahamic religions and just the Bible and Quran. But at the same time, you made a pretty controversial statement, which is that Jesus continued to teach in the form of A Course of Miracles. Now, not everybody's going to accept that.
No.
And so
That's my
you happen
opinion.
to. Yeah, that's okay. And so I'm not even arguing against it. I'm agnostic about that. But yeah, so the point is one can try to extend a particular religious tradition by bringing in new scriptures and updating the tradition. But one also need not, and it really depends on your temperament and your background and a number of other things. But if you're telling a Christian that the Bible is just a historical document, that's going to be kind of almost hurtful to them.
Okay, most Christians I speak with, the evangelical Christians, they've never read the Bible.
Right.
They've
Even
never
then.
read it.
Yeah.
So when I ask them questions, they don't know.
Yeah.
But they know
Yeah,
what their
but-
pastor on TV
Yeah.
said.
Yeah. Right. But if you say something bad about the Bible, they're not going to be happy about it. So it's kind of like we were talking about Shankara yesterday. People talk about what I'm saying. People talk about Shankara all the time, but nobody reads Shankara. So it's kind of like that in Vedanta. So, but if you say something bad or you criticize or say that Shankara is vaster than Shankara, whoa, how dare you? They'll come down hard. They haven't read a word of Shankara, but they get very upset about it. So I don't know. I think that might be the same thing with evangelical Christians. Yeah.
It seems like, and if you could point out maybe with Ramakrishna particularly, one thing that I've always been drawn about Ramakrishna is that he, and it's a sign of all great gurus or spiritual teachers that he in particular seemed to always know which direction or temperament was best for the people he came in contact with.
Yeah.
And is that play into basically the fact of he knew as an avatar, knowing people's karma.
Yeah, no, I think the answer is yes. And he literally says, you see, other human bodies when you look at other people. I see people as almost like glass containers, and I see straight into their souls. Sri Ramakrishna says, I peer into the depths. I can tell instantly what their past lives, what they did in their past lives, a mantra to give them on the basis. Even Swamiji could tell. There are some reminiscences of Swami Medhanandaji along the same lines. He touches them, goes into meditation, figures out what form of God that person had worshipped in their past life, and then gives them that mantra. So Sri Ramakrishna would do that constantly. And even make predictions about what that person will become in their next life, if they're going to be reborn, and all sorts of stuff. Or he'll look and say, oh, this is that person's last birth. So on. So yeah, exactly.
In the gospel, he always, one person who I have a particular attraction to as well is Garish Ghosh, and how it seemed then with his drinking and things, it seems like Ramakrishna would always be like, oh, let him, he'll figure it out. He knew, like, and just, yeah, but I relate to that because I'm also a recovering alcoholic. But that also is something that and in those situations now that I've been in, I really did not actually believe in the law of karma until I did started to actually see and go to AA meetings and things, and you really do see the innate similarities and connections of things that are just kind of you can't really put into words.
That's a great, yeah. A lot of people, their first entry into spiritual life is through AA and these similar things.
And I was lucky enough that I had a pretty good foundation already, but it's allowed me to interpret things, I think, in a very different manner than most do in the addiction world. I find it's very much people are always trying to figure it out, as opposed
to figure what out?
Just a solution or figure out the problem of life, as opposed to almost allowing it to manifest.
Yeah, that's a nice point. Thank you. Yeah. And other questions or thoughts about this?
Because we have tomorrow too, so you might want to.
We got tomorrow.
Yeah, we don't want to keep them here tonight.
Keep 'em here
Too long.
Although it's
And they're
a
probably
completely different
hungry.
topic. Fake it till you make it.
Yes.
Yeah. Should I
Alright.
give the information about tomorrow?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much going on. Wow. First of all, thank you, Swami, very much. We really appreciate that.
Thank you,
It was a really wonderful talk, as always. I mean, it's not a surprise. But, okay, it's good to see you. First of all, those little books that we have, if you can put those back there, we have very few of them, sadly, and we don't have the printer who used to make them for us, so that's all we got, but we'll have them available tomorrow. Swami already mentioned his talk, Fake It Till You Make It Tomorrow, which I think is an amazing title. I love it. Can't wait to hear it. Very excited about that. That's going to start, we'll have the RT like we did today at 4 p.m. And 5 p.m. Swami's talk will be happening because he's got something planned in the evening. We do have another hike tomorrow. We're going to leave here at 8 a.m. and we're going to go to Spring Valley or Spring Mountain State Park in the Red Rock. So kind of a quicker thing. It should be a lot of fun. So you're all welcome to that if you want to. Let's think, what else? Am I forgetting anything? Signing the books.
The book signing, yeah.
Yeah, Swamiji has graciously said that he was signing any of your books. So during breakfast, lunch, or dinner, wherever we are right now, I don't even know where I'm at anymore. Whatever meal we're going to have during that, you can certainly just go up to Swami and he'll be glad to sign it and maybe get some curry on it and all the rest of it as well. And I think that's it. Thank you so much. Oh, there are some books for sale if you want to just make a donation. There's also some murtis that I got brought back from the Bangalore Vedanta Society when I was there just some months ago. So please help yourself in any donations you want to find.
So we have 2 more copies of this book. That's it. Make clear.
2.
And then if you want a book, if those 2 are sold out and you still want a book, talk to me or Jeff and we can figure it out.
And we'll get it signed too.
Yeah.
Because I'll be going to,
Exactly.
I'll have more time. I'll go to Hollywood again. My presence is being requested. I think by a couple of people there. So thank you so much for coming. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And we're going to start doing the talks that we have here on Saturdays because we have the Dur, our wonderful chanting members. So we're going to probably start at 4 p.m. with the RT and then 5 p.m. with the talk on Saturdays.
Oh, so he's going to sing tomorrow?
Not tomorrow.
Oh, yes, he's normally.
No, he's out of town.
Yeah, that's it.
He's out of town. The other thing we could do, by the way, we could start at 5 p.m. with RT and 6 with the talk, but I think that gets a little late for some people coming from the other side of town. So when your input, by the way, is really greatly appreciated on timing for all of these things. So please let us know what's best for you, okay? So thank you so much, and please stay for food. And we have flowers, and you may offer them at the altar as you wish, okay? Thank you all.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Swami.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.
Get this out of your way, and then you guys can. Oops. Sorry. I want to hit you.
Yeah.
Sorry.